So the point here is to actually leave this time together with some actionable, practical strategies. One thing I do know for sure is that if you showed up here today, you have a desire to be a good leader. Whatever that entails, you want to be that. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And there'll be some things we talk about in that cultural awareness conversations, just how do you talk to people, basic things like that we can actually take away. I had to put it on the screen here because you actually do have a statement at HGAR about your diversity, equity, and inclusion and your commitment to diversifying your membership. So if you've not seen it, I wanted to make sure everybody did see it, and that it is up here on the screen for you to know what it is. All right, questions before we get started?
I'm not sure you're showing that on the screen. I'm still seeing your first slide
Oh,
with the
well,
title.
thank you so much. Let me try again. Oh, that's why somebody was shaking their head, and that's how come, huh? How about now?
Now yeah, that's right.
Okay. All
Thank
right,
you.
there we go. All right, thank you. Any questions before we begin? All right, hearing none, I'll move on. Also, if you've never been a part of any of my classes, this is a participatory learning. That means that I am not going to be the only one talking. You too can talk. I like to say that none of us are as smart as all of us. I'm certain you have experiences that I've not had. I maybe have some experiences you've not had. But at any time, you don't have to wait till the end or put your questions in the chat or anything like that. If you have questions, by all means, just ask them. Let's just talk. This is a conversation for you. Also, if you're able to, I would so love if you could turn your cameras on and fully participate in the class. That's how we'll know that you're fully participating. Now, I understand this may be conflicting with some other important things you've got going on, and I'm just happy you're here. But if you can, would love to see your smiling, shining faces as well. Okay, I'm going to start off. Don't read this. In fact, maybe I'm going to take it off the screen because I don't want you to read it. But I'm going to start with even what is diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I'm of the belief there's a huge misunderstanding about what people think it is. There's an anti-DEI movement. You've probably heard that term. And it's bizarre to me. And I'll tell you why, to me, that's bizarre. Because to me, what diversity, equity, and inclusion means is literally differences of people. Like everyone's different. Diversity literally means any of the cajillion things that make you different than the person in the box underneath you or next to you or above you. Every single person that you encounter in life is different, even if they're identical twins. Every single client you have is different. Every single agent in your brokerage is different. There are no two people who are exactly alike. That in of itself is diversity. So when we say we're bringing diversity training or we're bringing a conversation about diversity, sometimes people shrivel up and want to die. And the reality is we're just talking about people. And friends, this is a people business, yes? Yes. So if you are feeling a way about talking about people, it's going to be really challenging for you to be successful in real estate if people make you uncomfortable. That's all diversity is. We're literally just talking about all the people. And there's a whole bunch of things that make us diverse. Sometimes people jump straight to race. It's one of the dimensions of diversity, but there's language, there's religion. In fact, religion is the oldest and most meaningful way that people differ. Obviously, that's playing out in the world right now. There's all kinds of differences, age, height, experiences, a million things that can make you different from everybody. Everybody you encounter is different. That's diversity. The equity part is because we're all different, we might need different things to reach the same outcome. I have a friend, I'll use both of my best friends as examples. One of my friends, Missy, she's pretty tall for a woman. She's like 5'11". Alice is 4'10". Okay. Very different people, but we went to rent a car one time. It wasn't a car, it turned out to be a pickup truck in Texas. And Alice couldn't get in it because she's little. She's 4'10". So like we had to get on YouTube and figure out how to make that. What do you all call that thing that comes out of the truck, the little ledge thing that you put? We had to figure out how to make that come out so we could hoist her into the car, right? She needed extra help to get into the car. Same truck, but she was definitely having a different experience than Missy was. So equity is simply giving people what they need to reach the same outcome because we're different. The inclusion part, which is really what we're here to talk about today, is making sure all those different people have access to what they need, ideally in your world and in your space. If you run a brokerage, I'm guessing you probably want real estate agents to work there and feel included. If you are at the association in leadership, like you all are, you probably want your members to be engaged. That's inclusion. If you run a real estate business, I'm assuming you want your clients to feel like they have a voice in what's going on. That's inclusion, friends. Inclusion can be as simple as your kids getting to play on the playground with the other kids. That's really all we're talking about. So we're talking about people having access and being included in all the things. That's all diversity, equity, and inclusion is. And so that's why I'm proud you're championing it, because honestly, there is no business that can function without it. Moving on, how do you be a leader that champions that? That's actually what inclusive leadership is. It's a style of leadership where you say, yeah, I actually do want to be in business with people, all of them. And I am willing to give people what they need to be comfortable in my space. It's literally, do you make a space, whether you're a leader at the organization at HGAR, a leader of little people in your house, a leader at your church and your community. I somehow signed up for this. I'm home today because I signed up for this, the board, the HOA, for the love of God, like the board of this agent. I'm a lead, but you know what? I want all the neighbors to feel included. So we had to go knock on the doors and tell them what was going on today. All of the things, wherever you're a leader at, it's just making sure people feel respected and valued. That's it. And I know that that's what you want, which is why you're here. And you might wonder, like, how does that differ than like regular leadership? Traditional leadership is kind of seen as more hierarchical. I can't say it, hierarchy. As having a hierarchy. Somebody's in charge and then it's kind of top down. And leaders have a leadership style. This is my leadership style and everybody's going to get with the program. That's generally how a traditional leadership model works. And they focus on the bottom line and on results, which, if I can be clear, I focus on results too. I don't know about you all, but just so that there's no misconception here, I am in business to make a profit. That's why I'm here. I actually don't run a nonprofit. I used to, but right now I run a profit-based business. So this is not like conceptually feel-goody stuff that I'm talking about. This is actually stuff that generates a profit in business. Or quite frankly, I wouldn't invest my time in it because that's what I want to do. So we still have results, but an inclusive leadership gets those results a little different through relationships. And I think we would all agree, you all agreed with me, you shook your heads when I said it's a people business. You also agreed that this is a relationship-based business? Yes? Yes. Okay. So the idea with an inclusive leader is that we're still going to get results. We're going to do it through people, through the relationships we have with people. And because I like to say real estate is easy, people are hard. Because people are sometimes hard, we have to learn certain tools to have conversations with people and learn to understand and value the differences that we all have so that we have a collaborative environment. And that's what makes being just it's my way, I'm the leader, versus I'd love a collaborative environment so that we can have results through all the people, if that makes sense. Yes? Okay. There's some stats. I don't know if you all care, but there are stats. There's like real data and that actually attaches to this of when you use these tools that we're going to talk about, how people do feel more respected, how it does help make better decisions, how people do stay. Here's the reality. How many of you actually run a real estate team or a brokerage, or you're a leader at the association? Obviously, all of you are, is why you're here. And the fact, and actually having people stay with you matters, right? This conversation is that. It does not matter what kind of training you have at your association or your brokerage. It doesn't matter what kind of snacks you have in the break room. If people come in your space and they don't feel welcome, none of that will matter. Everything you're doing is for naught. So that's very important in the engagement and the retention, and a lot of other things too. But specifically for problem solving, inclusive leaders absolutely make better decisions. Absolutely, positively. Right before this, I was on a call. I run a franchise. We have It changes every day. We have 242 agents today at one of my franchises, but I'm buying another one. And there's 100 agents there. And one of the owners that's selling it to me, he said, I just have to ask you this question because of your role as the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are some people here with different political beliefs. And he went into, the left and the right and the this and the that. And he wanted to know how to address the fact that I support diversity, equity, and inclusion because there's investors there that maybe don't see it the same way I do. And I thought it was interesting because I absolutely need people who see it differently than me as my partners. The only way for me to make good decisions is that I have someone with a different perspective helping me solve the problems. And I'll get into a little bit later of why, I feel that strongly about it. But the fact that you have people who don't see it like you or may have a different perspective than you is very important to actually running a profitable, functional business and a profitable and functional environment in general. You can make better decisions when there are people who have different perspectives than you around. So all of these things are legit reasons why this matters. The reality is sustainability is not just about what you can get. There's a lot of risk in not being inclusive. And we'll talk about that as well. The risk of losing profitability, performance. People do perform better when they feel included, by the way. All of those things play a big part in why we care. I have demographic shifts last on this bullet, not because it's least, but really because it's one of the most important things. I'm not going to read all these stats on here. But one of the things about it is that there is some transition in the demographics taking place. A really important thing that I think that we need to know is that half of the United States population is a millennial or younger, millennial or Gen Z. Half of the population of the United States as it stands right now are under the age of 42. And then if we're just talking about Gen Z is the most racially and ethnically diverse generation ever. These are going to be our first-time home buyers. These are going to be our new agents. These are going to be all of that. And I think what's most telling about some of this data is that last 2023 to 2024, I'll call it last year, 100% of the population growth came from communities of color, especially in Texas, Florida, Arizona, places like that. And the reason that that's important is if we don't learn how to understand all of our differences, quite frankly, you won't be in business. You just won't. And so that's the reality of it. Like I mentioned, there is a cost to not being inclusive. That typically comes in the form of lawsuits. I'll just be honest. You all are a great, fantastic, fabulous group. You are here because you're great leaders and you want it to be. Sometimes I've been invited because they have been sued. Sometimes I am invited because I am a part of the lawsuit of the solution, the whatever, they got to pay some money and they got to get some education. And it happens a lot. So learning how to be proactive in your inclusion efforts isn't just a feel good. Sometimes it actually saves you money because sometimes the cost of exclusion comes in the form of a really hefty check. And we don't want that either. We certainly don't want any fair housing violations. We don't want any of those types of things. There's another significant loss as well, though. If you kind of don't tap into certain markets, you are missing a ton of opportunity. If I just told you that 100% of the population growth is coming from people of color, and that's not an area that you're focused on, I think you're missing 100% of the population growth opportunity. And so there's some cost in that as well. And especially if you actually have paid people that are working with you, that turnover, it costs a lot of money to retrain people and re-get people invited and all those things. And so there's some real high costs of not doing that as well. I'm stopping here. Questions before I go on to my yellow vase analogy? Hearing none, I'm moving on. Yeah.
I do have a question. I'm hearing what you're saying. Okay. So we were just dealing with inclusive leadership, and what I heard you say is that traditional leadership is based upon a hierarchy. And where the paradigm shift is with diversity, equity, inclusion is just a different type of leadership because it stresses on the inclusivity in terms of making decisions and the diversity of thought, which actually results in a higher level of productivity and income because of the sheer numbers showing that our population has changed and we need to be in tune with all the things. Is that right?
Yeah, 1000%. And I'll give you a real life example. Like I called a meeting with two of my staff members at one of my brokerages because I need them to help me make a decision about the other one. And I could make a decision myself. I'm the leader, right? I'm the boss. I could say, here's what we're going to do. This is what I want to do. Hey, you do this. Graham, you do this. Luke, you do this. I could do that. Or I could say, hey guys, here's what we've got going on. What do you think? And they'll give me their perspective and what they think. And I ask for it, which is exactly why the analogy, perfect question and tying into this, which is exactly why I ask, because I still have the opportunity to do what I want. I'm the boss. I can still say, no, I'm going to do it this way. But I value their perspective because I'm going to make a better decision when I have more information from various perspectives. So yes. And so let's go into this analogy. I use this a lot because it brings clarity. I'll use myself as an example when I talk about we're all different. I was actually, my parents are ministers and we were raised in the church. I have 3 older brothers. In fact, I actually went to school at the church. I learned the alphabet in scripture. So we have, that's our upbringing. Now I have deviated from some of those ways. My brothers are hardcore conservative Christians. I'm talking about hardcore. I'm not like that. As soon as this is over, I'm probably going to go to happy hour, you know? So we're very different people, but we have a similar upbringing and a similar background. And because of my upbringing though, and my background and what I've learned in life, the reason me and my brothers are different is I've had a very different life experience than them. But my upbringing and my background and my life experiences, everything I see in the world, I see out of my own personal lens. These 2 eyes right here, my lens. So for me, let's call my lens red. If I am looking at this yellow vase through my red lens, what color is it for me?
Green.
Orange.
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 Orange, yeah. If I'm looking at a yellow vase through my red lens, it's going to be orange. But you all are from somewhere different. And quite frankly, Priscilla, you're not necessarily wrong. You might be seeing it green, but you all are from somewhere different.
The
and
colors.
Maybe you didn't grow up in the church. And maybe
just had to remember my colors.
Oh, yeah. You all are from someplace different, you know, and you have a different upbringing, and maybe you didn't learn the alphabet and whatever, you know, you're different people. And so let's call the lens that you're looking at the world through, let's call your lens blue. If you're looking at this yellow vase through your blue lens, what color is it for you?
It should appear green.
It would be green.
Okay, so to you all, it's green. Mine, I'm seeing it orange, you're seeing it green. Who's right or wrong?
No, nobody's right or wrong. But we even see some societies with fewer color names that therefore discern colors completely differently based on the structure of their language, which is a very interesting psychological fact to me.
Some people thought it was, who's Janine? You're drawing on my vase.
A little artwork. Please forgive me.
Blue. Now it's definitely blue. No, but but no, you're right. And it's, you know what it is? It's not necessarily, it's not really about right or wrong at all. We have a different perspective of the same thing. The challenge is we go in and say, no, I don't know what y'all are doing in New York. Obviously, it's orange. Duh. Everybody knows that. And you're like, no, around here it's definitely green. No, it's orange. And then we get on Facebook and we fight about it. Right. And then you call the CEO or whoever and say, we can't have Priscilla on the board. She thinks it's green. That's just not gonna work. And matter of fact, she's not in culture. People like to use that a lot if it's not your way of seeing it. And back to the question that was just asked as to the value of these perspectives, the reason I invited Graham and Luke to provide their perspective is because I know I see it orange. They have a totally different background and upbringing and different clients and different friends and different lifestyles. They probably see it green. So from you all's perspective, what do you think of this? There's value in the perspectives. The challenge for leaders is they get so convicted in their own perspective that this is just the way it is. And if they don't see it my way, I don't want to know what their perspective is. Friends, that's not inclusion. That's the opposite of inclusion. If I can't have a perspective and you have a perspective and we operate in the same space, then you do not have an inclusive space. You have a space with one singular voice and everybody better get with your program or else. That's not inclusion. I was actually teaching at I was in Houston, I think. I was invited to speak somewhere and I said something that a lady in the audience didn't like. And I mean, she didn't like it. Like this never happened before. She was really bad. Like she went in the hall and then the people invited me, they were like calming her down in the hall. And I didn't know what was going on. One of the ladies came in and said, she's really upset about something you've said. We've asked her to step out and leave. And I said, well, why would you ask her to leave? No, have her come in. And I had her come back in and I had her come to the front when it was appropriate and speak her voice, what she was upset about and what she thought. And now, of course, as soon as I did that, I realized that she was off a little bit. This lady was a little bit, but the point was, just because I have the microphone doesn't make me right. You know, she very well may have had a different perspective. And if she had that perspective, probably other people might have had that perspective too. So the value of perspectives, but it takes an inclusive leader to say, I actually value that you see it differently. That doesn't mean I'm going to do what you said do, but I do in fact value your perspective. And I asked for it so I could help make a good decision. And I'll use all of this information to make the decision that I need to make as the leader. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. The problem is that people are just like, nope, they got to see it this way. They got to. So his point about, some of these people see it this way and they're concerned that you might see it that way. Good. That's why I need them there. I hope they stay. That's how we'll be productive and profitable. There is an actual, I don't know how to get your color off of there. Does anybody know how to get that off of there? What if I stop and start again?
My apologies again. I apologize for that.
No, that's okay. It happens actually all the time. There. Yeah, it happens all the time. How about now? Is it gone?
You're good.
Okay. So the idea behind the different perspectives, there actually is a link between the identity, the lived experience, and your leadership style. I'll use Graham. He's my team leader at my office. Graham and I have very different leadership styles. Come from very different places, and we're very different people. He's a white man. I'm a Black woman. He's from here. I'm from other places. He lived this way. I lived this way. He has a very different leadership style. I love his leadership style. I need him. I hope he never leaves me. But we're different. We have totally different leadership styles because my identity and my lived experience are going to shape how I do things. The reason I'm so passionate about being an inclusive leader is because I haven't always been included. My lived experience. And so I lead in a way that I know it didn't feel good when I was under someone's leadership who didn't care what my perspective was or what my voice was. And so I lead differently. Someone who may never have experienced exclusion may not lead in that same way, not because they don't care about it, not because they don't want to be that. It's just not their lived experience. So it hasn't shaped how they show up. There's not rights and wrongs. It's just understanding the perspectives and experiences of other people. What it does when you actually understand that we all have a different perspective, you can value people's where they are, and you can lead differently with empathy and adaptability and like, okay, I can see why you would see it that way. That would make sense. I wouldn't see it that way because I don't have that experience. I actually had, I guess I'll call it the privilege of teaching some police officers. And it was really, I will say it was a privilege because they were really open with me and they were out, not inner city police, they were up far away. I liked it because they said, what if your experience about a certain group of people has always been negative? And so they operate from my experience and interaction with this group of people has always been negative. And so that's how I lead and live. And my answer to that was because your experience has been narrow. Your experience with encountering those people have been from the perspective of the police, which means you're probably encountering criminals most of the time, not necessarily the whole entire population of those people. So if you have a limited experience and a limited lived experience, your lens is limited. And the solution to that is simply to meet more people. I don't think you all have that problem where you live. You know all kinds of people. There's all kinds of people to tap into. But there is a link between how people lead and who they are and what they've experienced in life. So it creates some barriers, really, to being an inclusive leader when you have that. And we're going to talk about 3 different types of those barriers that there are. There's the individual barrier, there's the cultural barrier, there's a structural barrier. And I'm going to start with the individual barrier because as leaders, everything starts with you. You can't go out and start fixing other people until you first fixed yourself. Leadership is an inside job. You start with yourself. In fact, even going all the way back to diversity, equity, and inclusion, when I call it that, when I say DEI, how do you actually feel about that? The interesting thing is when someone says DEI, people literally have a feeling about it. You either feel good about it or you feel scared about it, or you want to crawl under the desk, or you want to leave the class immediately. I mean, people have feelings about it, but it starts with you. What is your personal disposition about all of these things? And the barrier to being more inclusive is literally typically we have a fear or a limited experience or some sort of bias that we're encountering. I'm not going to get into a whole unconscious bias lesson, but it's a very real thing. We all have biases. I prefer warmer weather over colder weather. So therefore I like living in Texas more than I like living in Minnesota. I live in both, but I have a bias towards Texas. I might say, oh, I love this sports team because my kids used to play on it. I have a bias, right? There's a lady I just was speaking with and school just started, and she doesn't like her kid's teacher because the teacher is young and she likes older teachers. She thinks that they're not going to be able to handle her kids. She said her kids are too bad for young teachers. She needs a more seasoned teacher. She has a bias for older teachers. So she walked right in, saw the young lady, didn't like her. She didn't know anything about her, right? It's a bias, right? We all have these kinds of biases. Some of those are conscious. That's a conscious bias. And then there's the ones that we don't realize that we're even operating in. And then there's the structural biases that exist that we operate in because it was just created that way. But the one that we can control, obviously, is the conscious. Sometimes what we have to be a little more aware of is the unconscious one. And I'll just give you one example and then move on. This example is about, I'll use me. I like to use me in examples. That way nobody feels like I'm pointing fingers at anybody. I'll use me. I like to walk, long walks, except for not around this neighborhood. There's too many dogs and I'm scared of the dogs are gonna hurt my dog. But I like to walk, and when I walk, I listen to podcasts. And I have a really healthy library of who I listen to. They're leaders and pastors and who else? CEOs and authors and whatever. But one day I noticed that all of the people I listened to in my plethora of things I listened to were all men. Mostly about, these are mostly like leadership things and personal development, professional development, that kind of stuff. But they were all men. And I didn't think much of it until later when I was invited to speak on a women empowerment podcast. And before they went live, they said, Julia, we're going to ask you to talk about your favorite book. So be prepared. And I said, great. And I had this big bookshelf behind me. Not one of those for show bookshelves. This one was real. It was my legit bookshelf with all my books on it. So I turned around and I grabbed my favorite book. And they said, oh, that's great. But can you grab one that's from a female author? Because, this is like a women empowerment thing. And I was like, oh, yeah, of course. And I turned around and I didn't have one book written by a woman at all. And it was in that moment that I realized, not in that moment, when I went to work in the C-suite at KW, they said, hey, when you have reports, do you want to report to this person or this person, this guy or this lady? Him. I didn't know either one of them. I just automatically selected him. And I realized that when I thought of or saw a leader, I assumed a man, which people find to be absolutely crazy because I've been a leader in every environment I've ever been in. And they're like, that is really fascinating that you would, but I didn't even realize I was doing it. Especially the unconscious parts come, especially when you have to make fast decisions or be quick about it. You say that one, you just pull from your lived experience, your upbringing, your whatever. And I had an unconscious bias that I thought that if you say leader, obviously we're talking about a man. That was an unconscious bias. Now, since then, of course, when you realize you have an unconscious bias, by the way, you have to correct it, right? So I went on this long journey to correct this, and I realized I was missing out on 50% of the information and population from other perspectives. That was so valuable. So you don't have to, please don't send me any more Brene Brown books or any Oprah. I've got them all. Every time I tell this story, somebody starts sending me books written by women. I've got them all. But that's just a bias that I learned that I had. And then where does it come from? Well, maybe from the church. In our church, the men are all the leaders. At my church that I go to, I just realized last weekend, the men are still the only ones that handle the money. There's still some of those things that come up, and I have a bias. We all do. I'm using myself as an example. You probably do too. Some of them you know about, some of them you may not have even discovered yet. But when we discover those, we have to be very aware. I'm now very aware of my upbringing and how that will impact my decision-making so that I don't have these types of biases. But we all have them, but it's certainly a barrier to being inclusive when you have unconscious biases that you don't know about, or even structural biases where, like in the case of my church I just example, that's a structural bias that was designed that way. And those kinds of things. The other barrier that we often encounter is cultural barriers. And since I'm talking about my church, I'll just keep going. The pastor's wife, we were doing something and she said, we've been doing it this way for 30 years. And I said, I'm trying to be respectful, but I'm like, I know, I can see that. Like, I can tell, right? Like, yeah, maybe it's time for a different perspective. But we get caught up in this is how it's done, right? We always do it this way. Well, yeah, the men always take the offering. Yeah, but why? And as a leader, do you have the courage to challenge the status quo? Just because it's always been done that way doesn't mean it always should be done that way. Also, when we have a culture that we've created, sometimes we want to make sure people fit into it. Like I said, when I said, okay, you all said that the vase was green, and I said it's orange. Now, in my organization, I might say, well, everybody knows it's orange. So they don't really fit in here. They're out of culture. The culture of our organization, we all see it, and you expect people to blend in or have similar backgrounds. That's not actually where true growth comes from. True growth comes from somebody coming from the outside and saying, oh, you've always done it that way? Let me tell you about this organization that did it this way. Maybe, but a lot of times we reward people that just go with the flow. And we discourage that collaboration and that perspective building. And so those are some things that really hinder our growth as a leader. That we've always done it this way. We want people who do it like us. We want it done the way we do it. We want them to talk the way we talk. We want them to walk the way we walk. And that is going to hinder and limit your growth when you're not allowing for a different perspective or collaboration from people who have done it differently. And then the last one is, like I already mentioned, kind of the structurals. But there is the very real, what do you call it? I guess the battle against diversity, equity, and inclusion, that people say, we don't want to lower the standards, or we just pick the best person for the job. Yeah, I get that. Everybody wants to pick the best person from the job, but why did you pick that person? Sometimes we do these things, or we say, oh, that's the best person for the role because you're comfortable with them. They're familiar to you. It's called an affinity bias. You have an affinity for things that you deem just like you. And just like you could be anything. Like when I was in France, I met a lady that was from America. And you know what? She was just like me because she was the only one speaking English at the time. But she was my BFF that fast. Now, back in America, I probably would never even speak to this lady. But I have an affinity for her because she's just like me at the time. we tend to have a affinity, even when we don't recognize it, for people who are just like us. And yeah, you picked the best person for the job that you are most comfortable with. And so just understanding that when those kinds of things, we do, by the way, we do want the best person for the job. But we want to make sure that there's nothing that I'm doing, my bias about men being leaders. I want to make sure that's not inhibiting me actually picking the best person for the job. And by all means, never lower a standard for any reason. The point of it is that we want to raise our standards and lift our standards. And when I introduce people who maybe have done it differently or have a different perspective than I do, I get a different idea about how to do that. So these are just some of the barriers that you could encounter when you're exercising your inclusive leadership. What are your thoughts on those three things? You have no thoughts whatsoever?
I have a thought.
Thank you.
How we've always done it is probably one of the more annoying things because it closes off progress. It closes off new ideas.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Especially if how you've always done it isn't getting you the results you've done. That's when I see when people do it that it baffles me. This is the way, like when she said, this is the way we've always done it. And I just want to say I love my church before I say this. But that's why the roof is still leaking and we still raising money for the building fund. Because that's the way you've always done it. You're not getting the results you want with the way you've always done it. So at what point, do you say, yeah, maybe we should hear out some different perspectives? Yeah. Other thoughts on that?
One of the things, individuals, that sometimes it's fear that people have in coming and bringing a new idea. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people are fear of others because of what they may think, but you have to know who you are first. And when you have a good idea, to bring it forth. And if the person in leadership is willing to listen to you, that's a different way that you can help the company to grow.
Yeah. And you know what, you talked about something, Emily, that we're going to talk about in a little bit here. That's a psychological safety that you're referring to. You said you have to be comfortable enough to be able to bring your new idea. Mm-hmm. That's the leader's job. The leader that's why we're here. We want to create an environment where Emily can come in and say, I got an idea, and feel comfortable that we're not going to ostracize her. We're not going to throw tomatoes at her. We're not going to say that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You're not in culture, get out, In order for her to feel comfortable doing that, there has to be an environment that is conducive to you contributing your idea. And you all, as the leaders, are the people who are responsible for creating that environment. So we'll talk about in a little bit, how do you create that environment so that Emily can feel comfortable coming and saying, I have an idea. I think we should do it this way, instead of just sitting there and saying nothing, because every time she says something, she gets shut down. Patrice, you've got your hand up.
I think the one that's the most interesting and the most difficult to overcome is the structural one, because it's like rule of law, right? And so if you're following the law, it's so embedded in our system. That's the hardest one, I think, to kind of overcome.
Yeah, it's definitely the hardest one to overcome because it is a system. It's not a person. Like when it's a person, you can do something about the person, right? But when it's a system, we could use redlining, for example. Like that's a system, that's a structural biased system. You can't just go and say, Ben at the bank did X, Y, Z. It wasn't just Ben, it was a whole system. So dismantling systems is obviously a much heavier lift. Ray, and then Anthony, and then Crystal.
Yeah, I think Emily touched on such an important point, because so many times people are making decisions or avoiding decisions based on fear and allowing inertia and just let it go the way it's been, instead of me coming up with an idea or trying something new, because if that thing fails, now it's going to be attached to my name and I will receive judgment as a result of it. So instead, I'll just stay quiet and just keep it the way it is. And fear is such a strong motivator in those environments.
Mm-hmm. So tell me, Ray, if you were the leader, how would you create, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you were the leader, how would you create an environment where people wouldn't have to be fearful to do that?
Yeah, well, I'm grateful for that. So you know, the best way to do that is to offer an opportunity to have ideas and to pull out ideas for everybody to be able to say what they're thinking and throw it in a pot without judgment, because then it becomes the group's ideas as opposed to the individual person. And sometimes that allows people who would not have spoken up to give them a chance to speak up. So if you set up an environment where people are allowed to create ideas and put them in this pot, then some of those ideas will come out where people would have stayed quiet.
I agree. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Anthony.
Yeah, hi. So I was thinking of your vase scenario, and I was thinking, is it more when you're trying to solve the problem with the problem of the vase, is it more beneficial to try to get everyone to take their lenses off so that everyone can see the vase at the same color, or is it more beneficial to try and look at it with other people's lenses to see what they're seeing, you know? And so that's kind of where my mind went with that. Are we all trying to understand our perspective, or are we all trying to look at the problem in a similar way?
I don't know that we're trying to look at the problem in a similar way. And I also don't know that we're trying to, I agree with it. I think we're simply trying to respect it, you know, because I may never see it the way, I can't really take my lens off. I mean, I'm seeing my lens through my individuality, my experience in life as a Black woman. I'm seeing it through my experience as being raised in the church. No matter how much I try to shake that, poof, you know, I can't take my lens off, but I also realize there's another perspective, right? So you may come with a very different perspective, and I'm like, I just can't see it that way, but I respect what you're saying. I get why you would say that. And now I've taken into consideration your perspective. I don't know that we can see it the same way. I don't know that we'll ever see it the same way, but I think it's more about respect, that I respect the way you see it. I'll take that into consideration, you know, than actually trying to get somebody to see it our way. Also, by the way, I should have mentioned that I don't necessarily need you or want you to see it orange. That's just how I see it. I appreciate the fact that you see it green. That's why you bring value to me, because you see it green. If you were just like, yeah, you know what, after careful consideration, Julia, you're right, it is orange. Well, now you're useless to me, to be honest. I already knew that. Okay. Yeah. So now it's not the same thing. It's more about respecting the fact that you have a different perspective of it and seeing what we can do together with those different perspectives. Crystal, yes.
So Patrice touched on it, because the one of these barriers that I would say is the most triggering, I guess, for me, is actually number 3 as well, which has to do with structural. Because in my experience, both in a microcosm and a macro space, is that is the area where we have the greatest ability to delude ourselves in thinking that we're being fair.
Yeah.
And it's not, because we don't understand that the history behind a system or a policy is rooted in exclusion. So we could be trained in a certain way and think that this is a best practice without ever asking ourselves who decided it was the best based upon what.
And I may never know until you come to the table and you say, hey, Julia, did you ever consider the fact that, you know, and again, this is why I'm kind of harboring on the perspectives and the inclusion, because I probably will never see that. I do think it's fair. Let's just say I think it's fair. I think it's fair. I think that's how it should be. And until you come and say, yeah, may I, you know, I maybe never will, right?
Right.
Yeah, and so that's why it becomes important to have these various voices at the table to challenge the status quo. And as leaders, we have to create a safe environment to do that, so that there's not the fear of, this isn't going to get me anywhere, I'm going to get shot down, right?
Because like, even when you were just discussing, if you like meld that with just what you were talking about with the perspective, the lenses, and looking at the vase, you know, kind of leads me back to data, right? So how many people see it as orange? How many people see it as green? And will we allow ourselves to ask that question, because our policy or procedure could be excluding those people? Like, right. I think it's something really, really general that has to do with how people process information. Like, there's like about 25% of the population that cannot process multiple choice questions.
Yeah, you know, you bring up a good point, and then I'm going to move on from this. But the point you're also bringing up is that without, I was surprised to learn how many people saw it green. Let's just say, you know what I mean? Like, and if you're living in an echo chamber and you only have people around you who are saying, you know what, after a second careful consideration, Julia, you're right. If you're in an echo chamber where people are doing that, you don't realize that you're in an echo chamber and that there is an entire world. I had a friend of mine recently, she said, I was telling her something when she was like, that's is really not uncommon. I was like, yes, it is. I don't know anyone who does that. And she was like, because you live in a bubble. And I was like, no, I don't. Do you know how many people I know? I know people all over the world. And then I chat GPT'd what we were talking about. And she was right. It was like so super common. And I didn't realize my all over the world still consisted of people all over the world, just like me. That's all it was. But, again, lived experiences. Tiffany, I'm going to get to you and then I'm going to move on from this. And then also, Michael, your chat about self-awareness. I think I have a slide in here where we're going to talk about that. If I don't, I'll make sure we get to it. I taught a different inclusive leadership class yesterday, and I just it might be in this one or that one, but we're going to talk about it either way. Tiffany, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. I kept putting it down because I know you said you wanted to move on, but I was just thinking to part of the answer to Anthony's question too. I think like cultural competency is a good tool to have. Like it's not about necessarily taking off your glasses or trying to put on someone else's, but more thinking about like what colors have mixed to create these other colors, or like, and what is the reason behind it. And also like you were talking about redlining a little while ago too, to speak to like systemic things and to kind of go like to what Crystal was saying. I think it's also important to ask the questions about why and how did certain policies that we take for granted come to be. So like in our reading forum earlier this week for DEI, we were talking about planning and zoning and how like historically planning and zoning boards have been created across the country to be racially exclusive and to keep certain people, whether it's through class or race, out of certain areas of different towns. So sometimes we come across things in our day-to-day, just in our career, and we think, oh, this is the way it is just because it's there to make things fair and the same for everyone, but you don't think about the biases that went into creating those systems also. And I think it's always, it's important to remain inquisitive about it too.
That's a very good point. Thanks for adding that. I'm glad you re-raised your hand to share that. That's an incredibly good point. And it's also the reason why it's important for us to sit on those kinds of things. I know some people really shy away from RPAC. They don't like RPAC. I don't know why you would shy away from something that's so important for you to be involved in. And so actually getting involved in the things so that those structural systems aren't selected from the same people. I realized, to your point, and then I'll move on. To your point, Tiffany, I was summoned, I guess. I didn't even know what it was. I got a letter from the state attorney general. I got a letter from the attorney general asking me to sign up to do, honestly, I still don't understand it. And they were supposed to pay me and I don't even know how to get paid. But they asked me if I would be involved in basically what happens is when they take property, eminent domain, when they take a property, there are people who give a valuation to what they're going to pay the people who have taken the land from. I've never been involved in that process before. And I had to like go down to court and swear on, all these things. And I the whole time I didn't know what I was doing exactly, but I did know that you're taking land from people and who gets to say how much they get for that. And I just wanted to be a part of that because I have a feeling you're not giving them what you owe them. And then I realized through this long, like self-awareness process, when I figured out what was going on, someone in a position of authority had handpicked me. I was like, they have to know kind of like what I do, how did I just randomly get picked to do this? Because otherwise someone else had hand selected who they wanted to create the structure, right? And I realized when I got there, like, why am I here? And then I was like, oh, I see why I'm here. And so that's why you have to be in those kind of spaces. But to someone else's point about cultural competency, it is a core leadership trait, meaning you have to understand and I do say normally I wouldn't tell you have to do anything. You don't have to do anything. You don't need to do anything. But the reality is you're not the only culture that exists. We are not the only culture that exists, and sometimes we operate thinking, well, our culture is the best. Our culture is like this. This is the culture. This is the way it goes. And you really, when you understand that there are so many other cultures, and recognizing how culture shapes how people see the world. That vase we just looked at, how they communicate. Communication in different cultures is very different. How they make decisions based on their culture, how they develop, all of these things play into a part of people in general. And if you don't understand cultural competency, your leadership skills are not going to be as strong as they could be. And to the point that Michael was making in the chat, the first thing it involves is self-awareness. Realizing that, guess what? I actually don't know everything or everybody. My friend and I having that argument back and forth, everybody I know is, what do you mean? And then I realized I actually don't know everybody. Turns out there's like a billion people out there that I don't actually know. And so the awareness, and they don't live the lifestyle I live, and they don't eat the food I eat, and they don't speak the language I speak, and they don't drive the car, and just the awareness. And once you get that awareness, what you could do is literally learn some other things about cultural competency and develop it. One of the ways that you develop it and don't be in that echo chamber is getting some additional knowledge. And the best way to do that is to actually intentionally meet other people in places you wouldn't ordinarily go. I have a friend that often recommends that people go to a place where they'll be the minority and not the majority. Random places. I walked into now my kids are pretty good at my son's daughter, she's really good at this. We have a lot of different cultures here. Particularly, we have a very strong Somali culture. We have the largest Somali population in the country. The only place that has a larger Somali population than Minnesota is actually Somalia. And there are places I've just never been because they're Somali malls. But she goes to those Somali malls and she gets her hair done and she gets the henna and she gets just going and experiencing it, you learn a lot about other people's culture and you realize what made you think your culture was like the best culture? Where'd you get that from? But a lot of that cultural competency is intentionally exposing yourself to something or someone you wouldn't have intentionally exposed yourself to, gaining those knowledge. And again, I think, I think somebody else has, Anika, I think in here and in a couple of slides, there are some specific, I'm going to talk about some specific skills and tools to use. And if it's not in this, I'll pull up the slide deck that it is in and we'll talk about it. But it definitely involves you being aware that your culture isn't the only culture or the dominant culture, and getting the knowledge from other people's culture and learning skills, learning how to communicate differently, learning how to do all those different things. Absolutely, in a respectful way that you don't center yourself like, I'm here to show you all the right way to live a culture. Yeah, no, that's not at all what it is. And your attitude about it, again, going back to when I say cultural competency or diversity or equity, how do you feel? What is your attitude towards these things? What is your attitude towards the people when you go into these environments? But I'll keep going because I think I have a slide. And again, if I don't, I'll pull it up. But that's what I have to say about inclusive leadership before we move on to creating a culture of belonging. And don't worry, your questions in the chat about actually creating, using those tools, I'll get to that. All right, I'm moving on. The next, how are you all doing? Can we keep going a little bit longer? Or does anybody need to take a break? We're good?
I'm good.
Okay, all right, let's keep going. I want to talk about building that culture of belonging. And that speaks to where you all were saying about having the fear to even speak up or offer a different perspective, or those things. I like this statistic. US companies spend $8 billion a year on DEI training. And they never address the fact that people want to be included. And the reality is that there's, in general, in the world, there's a lot of isolation. But the inclusion part is really, really important. The sense of belonging is really, really important. If you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's above actually living, how you're going to eat, what you're going to, where you're going to work, where your money's going to come from, where you're going to live, above the security of those things, people have an innate desire to belong. It is a basic, fundamental human need to belong. That's why people join churches. That's why people join organizations. That's why people are playing pickleball. Do you think all those people actually like pickleball? No, they're trying to be in something. They want to be a part of a movement, right? Like all those people don't actually like pickleball. People want to be a part of something, and that social need or desire is so incredible. It is literally, I think, when we, as brokerages, we compete. But I would say the brokerage that I have is people want to be a part of the culture. Because quite frankly, we could sell real estate anywhere. And so that need that people have to be a part of something is so necessary that you've got to create and focus on what can we do to provide that feeling, that sense of belonging that people are desiring. There's entire organizations out there that are creating models of back to office business spaces, specifically on creating a space of collaboration and belongingness. There's a loneliness epidemic that's going on in the world that they are creating an environment where they say, you don't have to be lonely in the world. You can come and work here. You can come and join us. And so how do you create that environment knowing that people will leave you? If you're not providing that, they'll go somewhere where they do belong. They'll go somewhere where they are valued, where they are those things. These things matter. And back to culture that we talked about, culture really shapes the way that people engage, how they trust people, how you make decisions. Culture plays a major factor in all of that. So we will definitely get to how do you build cultural competency, because culture signals who belongs and how people participate. Going back to your points of being fearful, that's because there's been a culture created where it's not a culture of inclusion. It's not a culture of belonging. When there is a culture of inclusion, people feel invited to collaborate. They want to share their ideas, even if they're like, okay, this is going to be a dumb one. I'm going to throw it out there. And they still throw it out there because the environment's been created for them to do that. When the culture is exclusive, when it's not inclusive, people don't engage. They don't show up. They don't stay. They're quiet. When you start having meetings where people aren't saying anything, that is like a super red flag that the environment that you've created is not conducive to participation. If they all just sit there and are like, yep, whatever you say, something has gone very wrong. The engagement rises when people see that their value and their identities are reflected, and that you actually are taking their concerns into consideration. And it builds trust, and that's where the trust comes into. Trust is built when those cultural norms align with what they think is fair and respectful. If it is the cultural norm that everybody goes around and gets to say something, I think that's fair. I'll engage in that. But if people consistently see leaders who aren't acting in integrity and they aren't inclusive and they aren't trustworthy, the trust is broken. Or if they see favoritism, those kind of things, exclusion, that erodes trust very quickly. And the only way we can get it back is by one, having a shared cultural value. I put up the statement of HGAR's diversity statement because that is your shared culture. Everybody on this call agrees with that. That is something you haven't, yep, that's what our organization is. That is our shared culture. And if we collaborate about that, respect people's opinions about that, and we have some accountability behind that, then you build that foundation of trust, and growth comes from that. And then culture for sure definitely influences whose voice is heard and valued. Inclusive cultures bring those diverse perspectives that we were talking about to the table, and you lead with that. I'm here to hear what you all have to say, provide some solutions. Again, at the end of the day, I may take them, I may not take them. There may be some things that you don't know that I know that I can't take into account, but the decision-making process itself, whether it's transparent or not, if it's collective and people understand it, it helps value that. But culture shapes all of those things. So what we're looking to do is build a culture of belonging. And somebody mentioned feeling safe enough to do that, And so how do we build a culture of psychological safety and inclusion? I have some ideas, but I'd love to hear from you. And let me tell you what that means if you're not familiar with the term. Psychological safety is basically the belief that you're not going to be punished or humiliated when you speak up. What are some ideas that you all have of how we could build and cultivate a psychologically safe environment?
Stay off social media.
Okay. I'm not against that at all.
Don't read the comment section.
Now, you know what? That is my motto. Never read the comments. I'm in, I'm in paper and on the YouTube or whatever. I never read the comments. That's how I stay healthy. Yeah, don't read the comments. But how do you build an environment? Philip, if I'm coming to your training or I'm coming to your brokerage, how do I know this is an environment where I can be safe to be myself?
Are you asking me?
Anybody can answer. Yeah. Caroline says, make yourself vulnerable, admit your own mistakes. Yeah, for sure. That's a great way to start. I use myself as an example frequently, because just because I'm the person talking doesn't mean I don't have the same challenges you all have, right? Yep, I have biases too. I stereotype people. I gotta work on things. There's things I need to work on too. But when you say, hey, look, I'm not perfect either. I've made mistakes too. That does open up other people to be like, okay, well, since you're sharing, I guess I'll share,
Another way to do that is to ask for the leadership to specifically ask for a devil's advocate or a counterpoint. That way people can express their opinion without somebody judging them.
Sure, yeah. I agree. And Liz put in the chat, and this is great, just starting out the conversation with, listen, everybody's going to be able to say whatever they want to say. Okay, this is a safe space for this meeting. We're not going to attack people, just setting out the ground rules. We're not going to attack anybody. Everybody gets to say to it. Everybody's going to speak. If you're going too long, I am going to stop you, And so that is just absolutely just laying down the ground rules. And Tiffany says, and then sticking to it. Right. So when somebody says something, you say, hey, the leader that says, whoa, Tiffany, we're not doing that here. Remember, we all said this was a safe space. That's what we're doing, and so I agree with that. So yeah, one, set the ground rules and stick to it. Yeah.
I see that a lot of times agents or people will come to leaders and talk to them in private, and sometimes they don't think that it's something that they could share in public. But as a leader, sometimes, you'll realize that maybe it's something that can be shared. And
Yeah.
if you ask for permission to share that example in a group setting or at a team meeting, sometimes that could open the doors to healing for that person, but also I think, open the doors for other people to speak up on problems that have arisen for them.
Yeah, I agree. That's good, Steve. Lisa says in the chat, you have a 50-50 chance of being accepted or rejected. So just be like Nike and do it. Just do it. But no, you're right about that. And to your point, Stephen, if someone else is coming in a closed door or after the fact, somebody else in the meeting probably actually had the same thought or feeling. And so a lot of times, even in my classes, I'll say, hey, if you're thinking something or feeling something, can you make sure you ask? Because chances are someone else probably has that too. And I would hate for you all to leave still not knowing, still not being able to say what you wanted to say. Shanice.
Hi, I wanted to add that sometimes when you bring an issue to the leadership, I think it's a good idea to have some ideas about how you can arrive to complete that idea, right? A lot of times people come to leadership with ideas, but they have no way of how we're going to get there. So because I'm the leader, you bring the issue to me, and then it's my responsibility to flesh out and develop your idea. So I think that could create psychological safety if you come to the leadership with a suggestion and an idea and say, this is my thought of how we can get there.
You're saying come with solutions, right? Not just problems. Yeah, come with solutions, not just problems. I used to have a sign on my door because my time was limited. And it said, before you ask or share, give me 3 solutions to whatever your question was. Like, and then we'll talk about normally, but people figure it out. But yeah, absolutely bring a solution to it. But even feeling comfortable enough to come and say, here's what I saw, and here's some solutions or suggestions. If people don't feel that they're valued, their ideas are valued, their identity is valued, their perspective is valued, even that is challenging to bring a solution. And so some of the ways is even just people being afraid to show up as themselves. Have you all ever experienced anything like that, or know what I'm talking about, where you say, I don't go there because I just can't be me there? Go ahead, Shanice. Yeah.
So then I have to ask the question, like, at what point does an individual take responsibility for that? Like, can we blame leadership for that?
For which part?
For the part that I feel comfortable speaking.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. There is, of course, some self-initiative that you take. It's like, well, I'm going to say it, whether you want me to say it or not, I'm here. So there is that. And at the same time, while you do take responsibility for yourself, the idea here is that as a leader, we would be creating an environment where people wouldn't be afraid. But you're right, you can't always control everybody. I've got people that are scared of me for no reason whatsoever. Like, you could have been said that, like, so, like what, but there is some accountability on that person. But all I can control is the environment that I've created. That is a welcoming environment that allows people to show up as themselves, to be themselves. I asked that question, can you show up as yourself? And where did it go in the chat? Who said, oh, I said, have you ever, felt like I can't be myself here? And somebody said, for sure, yes. Those are challenges that a lot of people have about showing up as themselves. And so they don't show up. And to Shanice's point, there is some self-accountability in that, but how do we create an environment where people can feel comfortable showing up as themselves, challenging the status quo? Because if you don't maybe you don't realize it, there are people who are absolutely having to change who they are to make you comfortable. And what I mean by that, again, I'll use myself as an example. I was speaking in Miami. And since I was going to Miami, I invited some of my girlfriends. We were going to do a girls trip for the weekend. So I said, oh, everybody come down. We're going to do this girls trip. I just got to run over across town, do this speaking engagement real fast. Then I'll be back. But I had these twists and these Bantu knots in my hair because we were about to go, we were about to do Miami, right? So I had my hair twisted in, and just to be fully transparent, it looked very black. And I asked them, should I take my hair down before I go and speak at this place because I look so black? And then, of course, one of my friends was like, I don't care what you do to your hair. You can't get any less black than you are. But it doesn't matter what you do to your hair. But it was a real thought that I had of, will I be accepted if I show up with my hair like this? And I took it down. I took it down because I wanted them to accept me. And I thought that my hair was going to be a barrier for them to accept what I was going to say. And I took my hair down. And the second I got there, I was so ashamed of myself. I was actually going to talk about inclusion. And here I was taking my hair down so that I could feel like they would receive me, trying to look more like whatever it is I thought they would want me to look like. And it was the last time I ever did that. I never ever did that in my life. But I shared that story with them when I got there. I got there and I said, I'm sorry, this morning I had to take my hair down because I was worried that if I wore and it was cute too, y'all. It was absolutely cute. And I put a picture up for them. I said, I had my hair like this, but I didn't think you would receive me well, so I took it down. And then they all said, oh, you could have worn your hair like that. You could have worn your hair like that. Half of them are lying. No, I couldn't have. You would have judged me. And so just whether or not you're that person or you are the leader in the space, or you're just an average lay person, recognizing that people are going to great lengths to show up how they feel you want them to look to be received, to belong in that environment. Anika, you have your hand up.
Yes, hi. Your story, that anecdote, just reminds me of the way that systems of discrimination play out when we're talking about inclusive leadership or making space for psychological safety. It's very nuanced and, oh, sorry, I see Zoom is telling me about lowering my hand. It's very nuanced, and I think it creates like an extra burden or layer of challenge. Yes, for the individual, but also for the leader. Identity anxiety, thank you. And so it makes me think of, even aside from hair, if somebody has a you know, I hate to say disability, but it is what it is. You know, if you have a certain neurological, mental, intellectual disability, and you feel like you have to show up to and mask that, or you can't fully express, you know, what it is that you're going through, maybe to just be able to perform better and show up more authentically, like you're mentioning. And sometimes I think that it is on the leader to foster an environment of safety, to sometimes, like Stephen mentioned, you know, take those stories and be like, is with your permission, like, can I share this, redacting names? But also even just how do I say, like, if I notice as a leader that there's something going on around me, do I have to wait for anyone's permission to speak out about it? Or can I say, hey guys, I noticed this is happening, and I want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable talking about it, or whatever the case may be. Because as a leader, you're setting the tone.
You're both of those things we're about to talk about right now, Anika. You're moving me right along. Perfect.
Sorry.
No, perfect. No, and so to that point of the identity anxiety, it happens on both sides, right? So I have never really even learned or taught about identity anxiety until recently. I was in a training where they were teaching us to teach about identity anxiety. And I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna literally read the paragraph from this training about what it is. I had never heard it labeled this way, but that's what I was experiencing when I took my hair down. It was because my identity, I was anxious about how I'd be received. So it specifically says, people from marginalized groups may fear discrimination, stereotyping, or having their experiences dismissed. Those from dominant groups may worry about being seen as biased or racist. This anxiety shows up differently depending on the identity and past experiences. For people of color, frequent exposure to bias, both explicit and subtle, can trigger a stress response similar to facing a physical threat. This leads to emotional strain, mental fatigue, and potential health impacts. For white people, the anxiety stems from fear of being seen as bigoted. Because racism is viewed as deeply immoral, this fear can be intense. While concerns about being perceived as racist might seem justified, it can still negatively impact others, especially when the anxious person holds the power. They may disengage, avoid eye contact, or overcompensate with forced warmth, all of which can cause harmful connections and communication. So what happens is, if I'm uncomfortable at how I'm showing up, the person on the other side is uncomfortable that I might be uncomfortable. Now everybody's uncomfortable. Now we're just in a room full of uncomfortable people who are all anxious. So I'm uncomfortable that you're going to judge me. You're uncomfortable that you think that I think that I'm I mean, everybody's just uncomfortable. And there's a real psychological response that people have when they show up that way. And now maybe I'm going for an interview. Maybe I'm going for an interview and I have this identity anxiety. And on the other side, they have the identity anxiety and we're all anxious. This conversation isn't going that well. And I'm probably not going to get the job. And it's not even for the reason that I was worried about. It's because we weren't communicating well, because everybody's anxious about everything. It's really there's really no answer to it other than being aware that it exists. At least I don't know an answer to it. Maybe you all do. Being aware that it exists. When I first got to the C-suite at the KW office, they had a lady come in and do a training. And I wish she wouldn't have. It was like a diversity training that they all took, because after that, it was so obvious how uncomfortable people were to say anything to me. Like somebody wanted to say one time that my hair was cute because I wore it all kind of different ways, but they were scared to say anything about my hair because they had just learned in the class, don't say anything about her hair, and they're like, but her hair is cute though. But like, no, don't say anything, and so it's so much contention that we have that we're manufacturing really uncomfortable environments based on our identities. I just threw that in there because it was an interesting thing and conversation that I recently learned about, but a very real thing. And to your point, Anika, when you recognize that and notice that, having the courage to speak up, okay? Having the courage to be like, all right, I'm feeling something here. I just want to address it. You don't have to wait for people to come to you to address it. As the leader, it is your responsibility to speak up when you realize that there isn't something that is going well. And so here's an example of what I mean by that. we have to have tough conversations as leaders. All the time, I would get calls from, I oversaw 800 franchises. All the time, I would get calls from leaders that say, here's what happened at my brokerage today. Here's what happened today. And then there was a situation that had gone on for like 2 days with one of this guy's brokerages. He said, should I say something? Yeah, like 3 days ago. Yeah, you have to just address it. Everybody knows it's happening. Everybody's feeling that it's going on. By the way, they're having the conversation without you. They're having it in the parking lot. They're having it via text message. And so as the leader, when there is something that is contentious, you have to be willing to have the tough conversations. And being able to navigate that conflict and tough conversations. And that may take some skills. Maybe you need to take some communication classes. This in and of itself is not an entire cultural competency class, but seek out classes that talk about specifically communicating with various cultures. There's books out there. Kiss, bow, shake hands. I don't care what book you get. Realize there's other cultures that exist and have communication, because you have to say something. And do you know the main reason why people don't say things when they know they should? Why do you think people don't say things when they know they should?
Fear.
Fear of what?
Judgment.
Fear of judgment, fear of the reaction.
Rejection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Saying the wrong thing. They're worried about, I'll go all the way back to, I was working at a brokerage in Texas. I was new there, and I was new to Texas. I had just moved to Texas. And it's when George Floyd happened. And in that brokerage, there was a lot of conversations going on. And over the weekend, they called me, some of the agents called me, and they said, hey, isn't your family in Minneapolis? And I said, yes. And they said, is anybody from the leadership called to see how you or your family is doing? And I said, no. And then they said, yeah, and I had been hired to be on the leadership. And they said, well, a lot of us are really uncomfortable with how this is all being handled, and we want to leave the brokerage. And they were planning to like have a mass exodus and leave and go to the brokerage down the street because of not what this broker was saying, but all the things he wasn't saying. And so I said, well, wait, let me have a conversation with him on Monday. And again, I didn't know him well at all. And I went in and I said, I don't know you well. And I don't know what your position on all of these things are, but a lot of your agents called me over the weekend. And so I added up the company dollar of how much of a loss it would be to you if they actually left. And it's this amount of dollars. And I told them I would talk to you, but depending on how the conversation goes, they might leave, And I told them what they were upset about, and I told them what they thought about him and all the things they were saying. And he was floored. I mean, he was floored. He said, I have never been accused of being a racist in my life. And I said, to your face, it's the first thing they told me when I got here. And he couldn't believe it. He was so hurt, justifiably hurt, because after we had a heart-to-heart conversation, he was not coming off the way he wanted to come off. The reason they felt like that was not because of anything he had ever said. It was because there were multiple incidents where he should have said something and he didn't. It was all the things he didn't say. And he said, I said, well, why haven't you said anything about all those things? And he said, I don't know what to say. And I said, say that. You get up in front of you, say, listen, I don't know what to say, but I feel like we need to have a conversation about what's happened. And he did do that. And to this day, we have a very good relationship, but no one had ever confronted him before. It's a tough conversation. And, and so even when you think, and he was so proud of his brokerage, it was very diverse, with not just racially diverse, but all kinds of different diversity. And he was so proud of it. And they were talking behind his back, calling him a racist, and his wife and his son and the dog too, and he had no idea. But it was the things that he wasn't saying, the conversations he wasn't willing to have, that were harming him. And so even when you don't know what to say, as a leader, you have to say something. I like to think that I'm well-versed on having conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I'll tell you what challenged that leadership was the Israeli-Hamas war. You would think that has nothing to do with real estate, but it had everything to do with real estate. You know why? Because we're a company full of people. And oh my goodness, was I ill prepared. I don't know anything about world wars. Okay. I didn't know nothing. What I did know is people were highly upset and highly emotional, and they were expecting something from us. So we called a meeting, called an immediate town hall. Now, I don't know nothing. I have no idea what to say. And I called the meeting and I said, wanted to call the meeting because of what's all occurred, what's been happening, how people are feeling, and I don't know what to say. Who would like to start? And I let the people talk. What do I need to know? Help me learn. I don't know what I don't know. I don't even know what to do. I had zero idea what to do. I've been doing this for decades, and I had zero idea what to do other than to call a meeting and say, what should we do? I want to have a conversation about it. And I think the conversation went well. I don't know, you'll have to ask them, but I can't not say anything, because not saying anything is worse than me saying the wrong thing. Anika, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. I guess I wanted to know, or maybe talk more about, like, because in the example of the gentleman whose agents were going to leave, or in examples where things are not being said, and obviously there's like tension, like there's a lack of trust there, right?
Correct.
So did you guys come up, or did he come up with a solution on how to rebuild that trust? Do you have
He
pointers?
did. He had a conversation, and he got up in front of everybody and apologized, not just for that one incident that they were concerned about how he behaved about it. There were multiple times where he should have said something and didn't. And he said, also, at this time, when this happened, I didn't do anything about it, and I didn't do anything because I didn't know what to do, and I apologize. And to be quite frank, that's exactly what Gary Keller did, which is why I was hired. He created a social equity task force. He said, I don't know what to do. But there's a lot of smart people out there. Can we all get together, create a task force, and we'll all together learn what to do? Because I don't know what to do. And you have conversations about it. But again, that's that transparency and leadership, that I'm not the know-all. I don't know everything.
Right.
This particular scenario, I didn't know anything. I know some things now, but I didn't know anything. Yeah.
Do you think that that creates long-standing trust, though, or that folks may feel like, okay, like maybe this is just like placating?
I was gonna say it depends on the person. People could have took it as lip service.
Yeah.
They could have just took it as him just saying words, and there's nothing he can do about that. He spoke from his heart. He said what he meant. And since I brought up Gary Keller, I'll tell you, he said something else. He said, hey, I apologized for it, and that's the last I'm saying about it. People kept hammering him. Why you do this? Why you do this? He didn't know, and now I know, and now I did something, and I apologize. And after that, there's nothing else they can do. Can't make you believe him. And so that part goes back to the personal accountability of the person, of wanting to, if someone is truly saying, here's the conversation, here's where we're at, here's what it is, they can't make you believe them. All they can do, and all you can do as a leader, is do what you believe to be the right thing, which is to have the conversation. Past that, because trust me, you're never going to please everyone. You're just not. You're just not going to please everyone. But all you can do as a leader is say, because I can tell you right now, there's probably some people who didn't think that what I did was sufficient. And maybe they didn't believe me either. And I can't do anything about that. All I can do is what I felt was best, which was to have the conversation. And oh yeah, good point, Anika. Follow up with action. I can't just talk either. I can't say good talk. Thanks for sharing all that. I actually have to do something about what we talked about. And so that probably is where the trust is built, not just in the words, but the action that comes behind the trust. We did not take a break, and I think we could probably, if you all don't mind, just go through this last module.
Sure. Yeah.
Back there? Okay. All right. I'll just keep booking. The last one is, okay, great. Great talk, Julia. Great talk. What's the action, right? Great talk. What's the action? How do we actually embed this in our day-to-day lives? A lot of ways. One, just the awareness of it, but also being sure that whenever you're doing something, creating something, changing something, structuring something, maybe ask yourself some questions. They're here. They're not in any particular order. But it could be a whole plethora of different things that you're encountering. By this decision, who will be helped or harmed? Have I considered multiple perspectives? Are we using objective criteria, not personal preference? I don't want to do this because I like it. What's the objective criteria? Who's at the table? Who's missing? That goes back to the multiple perspectives. Maybe I have multiple perspectives of the same 5 people that I always ask for multiple perspectives from, but somebody's missing. There's a gentleman here named Cotty Lowry. He's an older friend of mine. And I really actually a friend. He tried to make me go to the fair with him. I don't do the fair. He tried to make me go to the fair with him over this weekend. Cotty just turned 79. And Cotty is a friend of mine who was president of a lot of associations and organizations. I like being Cotty's friend. I get privileges. He'll invite me to places and he'll have paid for a table and I get to sit. I'm sorry, I'm with Cotty. You know, I get to do, you know, all the things. And he has always been incredibly good at inviting me to places where he felt like a perspective of mine was missing. I have served on so many committees and boards that I did not sign up for because Cotty said, you need to get over here. I don't know what they're talking about, but they need a different perspective. And he'll sign me up to be on whatever committee it is he's the president of because he wanted a different perspective. He was always really good at that. The who's at the table, you know, who's missing, and inviting people who weren't typically invited. In one particular board, I took one of his friends' seats on a board and I was young. I was, I think, in my 20s. And I called them from the bathroom. I was scared because I went in the bathroom and I said, nobody here looks like me. I'm by far the youngest person. There's nobody else of color here. I'm scared. They said, what are you scared of? I said, they're all out there and I'm just in, they're like, where are you? I'm in the bathroom. Why are you in the bath? What is everybody doing? I was like, they're out there eating. They're like, so go eat. But I was like, this isn't, I'm so uncomfortable here. They would intentionally put me in those environments to have my perspective valued. They were good at that. I call them good leaders. When I think of inclusive leadership, I always think of them. They intentionally invited me to have my perspective added. You are probably in some positions and in some rooms and seats where you can be doing that for other people too. So considering those, inviting other people. Also, would I make the same choice if the identities were different? Here's what I mean by that one. There's a young man that just joined my brokerage. I want to take him in the corner and coddle him and tell him all kinds of things. When I came in, you didn't hold the door. I want to mother him, right? I want to mother him. When I came in, you didn't open the door. Your pants look like this. You didn't look like that. You know, I want to mother him. Would I do that if he wasn't a young Black boy? Probably not. No, I wouldn't, right? And so sometimes you say, oh, you know, so-and-so should be like this, so-and-so should do this. If they weren't them, if they were a different identity, would you still do that? And so I'm big on consistency. I think that's one of the ways that we
I gotta ask you about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Isn't that good advice though? I mean, is all bias implicitly wrong? And by the way, is it bias necessarily? Maybe you just feel more comfortable because he's Black, but you'd be inclined to
it is bias. It's
buy
an
an iron
bias.
anyway. I mean,
yeah, it's now if I did it for everyone, right? It is an implicit bias. It's an affinity bias because I feel like he's like my children. He's just like me. I have an affinity for him. I'm treating him differently than the other people. Now there's mentorship relationships, right? I maybe take on the role of a mentorship relationship or something, but I'm using it as an example because I had to ask myself, there was another young boy that closed the door on me and I didn't feel inclined to mother him, you know? And so in my leadership capacity, am I picking and choosing who I feel like, because maybe the other boy needed to be told too.
Probably does.
Yeah, I didn't. You see what I'm saying? Like, so why am I paying this kid so much attention? But that kid needed help too. Like some of the things the other kid did, I'm thinking like, does he have parents? Like, what is he doing? You know, but you know, and so am I being consistent in my leadership activities? Because maybe to your point, he does need mentorship and he does need it, but I'm the leader. Can I just do it for him or should I do it for everybody who's doing things like he's doing? It goes all kinds of different ways. And so I'm mindful of being consistent. If my nature is to mentor every young man that comes through that door that I feel like needs to be mothered, sure. But if I'm picking and choosing, it can go the wrong way too. I can do it the other way too. Other people, now, if this was a white man saying, oh, this young white boy came in and I want to mentor him, but you didn't mentor the black boy, this is the same conversation. You know, I'm not any more wrong than he is. And so it's just being consistent. And if my answer was yes, if he wasn't a young black boy and I would have still done this, my answer was yes, then absolutely. I'm like, hey, listen, here's how I need you to show up, right? You know, it may be different if that's how I always engage with the agents. But consistency is very big. And one, making sure that we don't get in trouble. Consistency does two things really for us. And this can go for anything, your buyer presentations, your listing presentations, how you hold an open house, the questions you ask clients about their finances. Consistency protects me from myself because I know that I have biases, right? I know that I know I have some, and there's some I probably don't know that I have. And so to protect myself from my own little ignorant self, I'm consistent in my activities. Buyer consultation, I had the same buyer consultation for 20 years. I said the same thing every time. One, because it worked. Two, I make sure I didn't miss anything. Three, because I know I'm judgmental. I don't want to give you a quick buyer consultation and give them an hour buyer consultation because I don't think you really can afford a house. I want to give everybody the same thing so I'm consistent in all of my behaviors, whether it be a buyer consultation or whether it be the young boy that came in through the door. So if I choose to tell him, here's how I want you to show up, this is what I want you to do, every young boy should be treated like that. Consistency. It protects me from my biases, and it also keeps us out of fair housing jail. God forbid you ever be brought before professional standards. One of the first things they'll ask you is, show me how you normally do it. Even if you normally do it wrong, they'll just send you to my class. That's all. But if you normally do it right, and this one time you did it differently, how come? So yes, to your point, and maybe differently, maybe there's someone else I might assign to mentor him, but because I am the leader, unless I do it for everybody, I probably won't do it for one. Okay. Okay, quickly, let me go through these. Some everyday things that we should embed here in governance and strategy. This is very important to all of you all who are serving on these boards and these leadership roles at HGAR. Obviously, we want them to be diverse. When I say diverse, please hear me in all the dimensions of diversity. I don't just mean racially and ethnically diverse. I mean diverse in business styles. I mean diverse in geographic location. I mean diverse in, by the way, what we haven't talked about is, I think maybe Anika brought it up, disability. 1 in 4 adults have a documented disability. 25% of the people in your board have a disability. And I can guarantee you, we are not appropriately representing people who have, and also when I say disability, sometimes we think of person in a wheelchair. It's a ton of different disabilities people have. Most of them we can't see. Are we making contingencies for that? Are we making sure that we have diverse representation across the scope of what diversity means? The inclusion into our association's mission, vision, and strategic plans. I did see the words in all of your mission, vision, and strategic plan. To the point of some of the people who have spoken, making sure we're putting the action behind them as well. Is it actually embedded in there like that? Conducting equity audits to assess gaps in your policies, programs, and the pipelines. Hey, is it fair? Have we included everyone, or has it gone to a lot of different people? Seeing what other people are doing, getting different perspectives from different associations. How are they doing it? What does theirs look like? And then I publishing a roadmap. And what I always mean when I say this is, yes, you have diversity in the mission, vision, and strategic plan, the words, when and where and who and how. What's the actual timeline? What's the roadmap? How is this actually integrated into the governance and strategy of the association? That's how we can embed it into day-to-day practices at the governance level. At the membership level, what are your strategies to recruit, retain, and serve members from underrepresented groups? One of the reasons I've been allotted this opportunity to buy this other franchise is because it happens to be in a location where there's an extremely underrepresented population that I think I have some strategies around how to engage. You know, and so what are your strategies to engage people who are underrepresented? This is not the bad part of DEI that people are trying to say, like, oh, don't, you know, have quota. We're not talking quotas or any of that kind of stuff. We're literally talking, there's people out there who need to be served. Are we serving them? Understanding that cultural competency isn't just a class you're required to go to, it's actually a member service skill. You are going to have members from all kinds of different cultures call you, talk to you, ask you questions, expect you to represent them. If you don't know anything about these people, it's going to be hard for you to do. Engage in some activities that allow you to meet people in different environments. Inclusive event designs, this programming, speakers, accessibility. I am so big on accessibility because 1 in 4 adults have a documented disability. 18% of people have disability by way of hearing impairment. Doesn't mean that they're actually deaf. Sometimes they just can't hear. I am so huge on microphones. I'm using mine and I hope, can you all hear me good today?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm intentionally
Yes.
using this microphone. I don't need to use this microphone, but I know that this microphone delivers a different type of volume to people, particularly because my friend Cotty, my 79-year-old friend, he wears hearing aid, right? So I'm always mindful of which ear I talk into, how I talk, and I'm always using a microphone. Anybody that knows me knows my biggest pet peeve is when you get into a large room and people stand up and say, I don't need a microphone, I'll just talk loud. Oh, that gets me. Oh, it gets me good. It gets me good. I feel like that's self-absorbed. I'm just saying this. Just because you can hear well doesn't mean everyone can hear well. Typically, in a large audience, somebody can't hear you. And they're not going to keep saying, what? They just don't hear you. Now your event wasn't inclusive. They didn't hear a doggone word you said, actually. And so everybody's not getting the full impact of it. So small things like that, accessibility features. I had the closed captioning on and I turned it off, but I turned on the opportunity for you all to do it on your own. I have that on because maybe some people couldn't hear me on my really fancy microphone. So I have options for people to have accessibility, incorporate those things, you know? Great, now I don't know, okay. Using data and feedback to loop what's going on. We do need to collect some data and feedback to measure who's engaged and who's not, who's coming, who's not, who's excelling, who's not, so that we can fill those gaps. And then celebrating cultural events authentically. Here's a quick example of what I mean by that. I'll never forget the day. It was a specific day, and our marketing department put out Happy Easter. The only challenge with that was that it was one of the very few times, and I don't even know if it will ever happen again.
Good.
The only challenge with that was that it was one of the very rare times, and I don't know if it'll ever happen again in history, that all of the 3 most predominant religions were celebrating their highest holy day at the same time. It was Ramadan, it was Easter, it was Passover, all at the same time. And we put out Happy Easter. How do you think that meant all the other people who were celebrating something else feel? Like, and then they came behind it. Oh, and for those of you that are celebrating, I mean, those kind of things. If we're going to celebrate something, celebrate everybody something authentically, you know, not forcefully, just authentically. But those are some suggestions for membership, engagement, and growth. And then, of course, leadership, talent, and talent development. Let's just start with the awareness. Bias and microaggressions in leadership are real. They're real. We want to train our leaders we only talked about psychological safety and belonging for 40 minutes, not even 30 minutes. We probably need to have more conversations about what that really looks like. Building leadership pipelines that develop diverse succession. That's also intentional, by the way. So there's some intent, I didn't mean to click that. There's some intention behind the pipelines. It's intentional on all roads. What I mean by that is in a lot of the boards, they have been intentionally grooming so-and-so's son, you know, for the longest time to be president. He's really not skilled, but he's so-and-so's son. They're creating a pipeline. Likewise, as leaders, are we creating a pipeline, right? What's that pipeline look like? What are we doing to contribute? All those times that Cotty was inviting me to those committees and those boards and those things, you know what he was doing? Preparing me to serve at his level. A leadership pipeline, which you could call that mentorship. You could call what he's been doing for the last 20 years mentorship. But maybe you have some actual systems of sponsorship models or mentorship models that you create to help engage people and build that pipeline. Let's see, communication and marketing. I think storytelling, I'm big on storytelling, is better than anything else. Stories of success, particularly. We have enough stories of statistics that aren't great, but how about stories of success that resonate with your audience? Using social media to highlight some of those stories. That is a great way to communicate inclusion in your marketing. You don't necessarily just have to say, and this month is Disability Awareness Month. Maybe we're actually sharing success stories of agents that work with clients with disabilities or clients that are disabled that have certain skills or tools that they could teach us. Impact storytelling is big. Showcase that on a bigger level. And then I think it's important for us to understand the language and the words we use. Words matter. The words we choose to use matter. Being very specific in our words matter. Now, let me ask you all something. Do you all say, I'm from up north, okay? So I'm from Seattle and lived in Minnesota, and we say you guys up here. Do you all say you guys on the East Coast? You're nodding
Yes.
your heads.
Yeah.
You're nodding your heads way
Yeah.
too slow for me.
Yeah.
See, no, in
Yeah.
Minnesota, everybody's like, you betcha we do. You know, like there's your language is different, right? And so the reason I say that is because it's common language to address a group of people to say you guys up north. It is not that way everywhere. Some people are wildly offended if I were to address a large audience of people with a gender specific term. And they're very much so offended by that. And so I don't know if you noticed, but I've been calling you friends. I'm specific about my word choice because I don't want to offend anyone. Even if I don't think it's a big deal to me, if it's a big deal to them, I won't use it. I have no problem not using words or using words that make people feel more included. It's not going to, whether you agree with it or not, you know, it's no harm going to come to you to use language that's more inclusive. So there's certain things that we are saying that are actually deterring people from wanting to be in business with us. Words matter. So maybe we learn some specific words that we should and could say. And then the last thing is inclusion is actually quite hard to measure. Measuring a sense of belonging is difficult. Sure, you might see a very large decline in your membership or your agent count or whatever it is, and you don't necessarily know what it's attributed to because measuring inclusion is hard. But I can guarantee you, if people really felt good about where they were and liked where they were, and they felt like they belonged, and that's where they go to feel like they have that sense of belonging and they're valued and all of those things, they won't leave. But measuring inclusion is kind of difficult. We could measure membership rates by demographic, but there's a whole lot of challenges that come behind that kind of thing and how that's done. So that's a whole different conversation. But new member acquisition, event participation, who's representing the committees or the boards. I know that there are some legal challenges, particularly as of late with the new administration and everything. There's some legal challenges that people are really, really afraid of engaging, but you have to engage at some level to get some data to know how your efforts are going or who your people even are. So there is some ways that you can do that and still be measured appropriately to understand what is really going on, how people are feeling. Are they feeling included? Are they participating in events? Those kind of things can still be measured to some degree. And then you could always send out a survey that has nothing to do with demographics, but it's just kind of answering some questions for you. And as a leader, if you're a leader, this might be something that you would want to send to your members. And it's just questions of, do members of my organization who help achieve our strategic goals, are they rewarded and recognized? Members of our organization respect and value each other's opinions. Is that true? Members of my team fairly consider ideas and suggestions offered by other team members. Is that true? I feel welcome to express my true feelings. These are just some questions you could put in a survey to just ask your committees, to ask your boards, you know, answer these questions and you can get a gauge on how included do people feel without any demographic data at all. And then from that, you can kind of ascertain who's feeling disengaged and who's not feeling that they belong. But in closing, thank you for sticking with me for 2 hours with no break. I appreciate y'all. I want to say one last thing. I got a quote here that I like. And it's to be the reason someone feels welcomed and seen and heard and valued and loved and supported. I'll tell you a quick story about my journey. 20 years ago, I've been licensed for 26 years now. But 20 years ago, a friend of mine came back to the brokerage we were at. And she said, I'm leaving. I'm going to this brokerage. This guy named John, he's the broker there. And I think you should come. And I walked into this office on Lake Street in Minneapolis. And I met this John guy. And he was nice. He was nice enough. And I felt like I belonged there. I felt welcome. And I joined it. Just that's why. That's the only reason. I thought they were nice. Actually, I thought he was rich. He looked rich. He looked like he had a boat, and I wanted to be a part of that. But he looked nice enough, and I joined him. And whenever I think of inclusive leadership, I told you him and Kadi owned this office. And I always think about him because everything I was able to do in real estate was because of them and their inclusion. I did all kinds of things. And they never stopped me from doing all kinds of things. And I was involved in all kinds of things. And I had all kinds of different roles. And I never felt like I couldn't show up with my afro or my Bantu knots, I always felt like I could show up as myself. And I was very welcomed. And because of them, I did serve in a lot of different roles, all the way up until I own it now. That's my franchise that I've been there for 20 years. And because of these guys, everything I've been able to do, because I walked in the door that day and met those guys, changed the entire trajectory of my career. And you have the ability to be that for somebody or not. You are either that for somebody or not, or they walk into your space and say, they don't really like me here. I don't get to say, I'm scared to speak up. You either are allowing someone to be themselves and you're supporting them to whatever level of achievement they can reach or not, or you are actually the barrier that's causing them to not flourish. I love this quote because I think we all want to be this reason. And I think we can. It takes some training and conversations and things like that. But for sure. Okay, I'm at time. Questions, comments, concerns, ahas.
Julia, how do we expand on this training? So will there be opportunities to do like a level 2? Like this is introductory. So like, will there be opportunities to do more?
I think that's one of the things
like
that
together?
Certainly you can do smaller workshops, like some of these topics we touched on briefly. It might be an opportunity for your association to have smaller workshops where we dig into these a little deeper. We had 2 hours to cover a bunch of stuff, but a lot of times, a lot of people wanted to talk about psychological safety. A lot of people wanted to talk about actually measuring inclusion. Maybe these are additional, mini workshops that your association can continue to have to go deeper into this, backed by action, right? Backed by action. But that is an action. You continuing the conversation by saying, now we're going to learn this is an action. Creating that, we talked about a roadmap. Maybe you get together and everybody creates the roadmap. There's a ton of things from today's content that you can take and make into smaller workshops to continue the conversation and the work. Other questions, comments, concerns, ahas. Somebody I haven't heard from today. Who hasn't said a peep? Don't make me call you out. I know who hasn't said anything. Amy, I haven't heard anything from you. You had to know it was coming, Amy. You had to know it was coming.
I literally actually did. No, it's great to hear all the different comments and all the different thought processes. And as much as you can always think that you're doing the right and you're trying to be thoughtful, there's so many ways that we fall into the bracket of being, we just go for the norm. We go for our simple thinking, and it's literally challenging ourselves to constantly say, but can I do better? Did I do better? Like, did I hear? Did I think? Did I ask before I acted?
It's 100% a consistent awareness and growth. As leaders, we're forever on a growth journey. And it's just a part of the growth journey. Thank you for sharing that, Amy. Anything else? Anyone else? If nothing else, I don't know, Linda, do you want to close us out? Do you have any last final words for us before we all take off?
Sure. Again, I just wanted to thank everyone, and I've read through most of the comments. I do think having being fortunate enough to have a very different perspective, because I've been at very different realtor associations, and I used to handle global for Miami. So I've traveled all over the world and been very fortunate to see different cultures. That I think the greatest barrier is the culture, and it's tied to your slide with limited experience. And so what I find coming into different organizations, this is not the first one, is that being able to change your mindset so that you're not just saying we're going to be inclusive, we're not going to do it that way just because we've always done it that way, but actually wanting that. And I think that is a very difficult thing to do. So I encourage everyone to start thinking differently and to know what triggers your mind to say we're not going to make a change and we're not going to consider something different. And I think that is a big step in inclusion. And I'm just very happy to see so many of our leadership on this.
Yeah, this was a great turnout. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Again, to the point that I already knew before I came on today's training, you have a great association, and this is a great group of people. You all really, truly are phenomenal. So why don't you give yourselves a round of applause? Can we just give yourself a virtual hand or a real hand? You are fantastic people, really you are. This is a great turnout. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you, Linda, for having me. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Tiffany and Nika, for leading the DEI committee. And I'll see you all on some other fabulous day. You all take care.
Thank you. You too.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Julia. Bye.
Thank you.